Hi, my name's Dave Whitefield from People and Risk, and I'm a culture and engagement specialist, particularly focusing on safety and risk. And I'm going to share with you a conversation that I often have with organisations reasonably early in the work that I do, and my work focuses predominantly on culture, because that's what it's about, culture and engagement. And so this is about the idea of safety and compliance. But importantly, again, I want to reflect on, first of all, my worldview. So I look at safety and risk issues through a cultural lens or a social psychology lens, which is how people are influenced by the world and in fact the people around them. So that is, I'm not focusing on hazard management or on systems or on legal compliance as such. This is about the language, particularly in this case, the language, and how that a conversation about this can uncover or highlight, and in fact sometimes sort of wedge open some issues that we've created around safety. But again, these are particularly cultural issues. So first of all, it starts with this idea of the language around safety and compliance. So I might put it up on the board and I might say something like, okay, well, here's our word safety and here's our word compliance, right? So first of all, some questions, which in this case are going to be rhetorical because I can't hear you answer, but are they the same thing? So does being compliant mean that you're safe, and does being safe mean that you're compliant? Now, hopefully you're reflecting on that and going, well, no, I don't think so, right? If they were Venn diagrams, they would not completely overlap. There's clearly some overlap, and in fact, that's an interesting question in itself, right? Is they're related, aren't they? Like compliance should be related to safety, and safety should be related to compliance, but they're not exactly the same, right? And I think that if we were to talk about a directionality to it, in fact, the way it's meant to be designed is that it should go that way. So if I say, what do we mean by compliance? We're talking typically here about, about a safety management system or something like that. So these are the rules and procedures that the organisation has to comply with, right? These might be influenced by legislation, but most people sort of refer to policies and procedures and rules, etc. So let's come back to the nature of the issue. Compliance is not the same as being safe. So if we're 100% compliant, that does not mean we're 100% safe. But they're meant to have directionality, they're meant to have influence. My thesis, if you will, or the idea I would put forward is, in fact, in many organisations, what's happened though is these two terms have ended up becoming conflated or squished together, so that in fact that Venn diagram is in fact overlapping in many organisations, and that in fact when people talk about when managers and leaders, for example, and even safety people say, are we being safe? What people hear is, are we being compliant? So let me talk about this as another way, right? If I talk about a compliance process over here, say a checklist, right? I need to go on this side to the right. Okay, so some sort of checklist. This might be for a pre-start or a worksite inspection or anything, right? Any checklist. The idea is, and this is sort of fundamental to where this is systems thinking, right? Is that checklist has been designed to support the actual check. So doing the check is the safety part. That's what keeps us safe. It doesn't ensure safety, but it's part of safety. The checklist is designed to be there as a thinking tool. It was not designed for evidence, and that's a different conversation, and it's another insight into how language is so important. So I'm keeping this in the context of I've got a checklist and I've got a check. The checklist is designed to help me make sure I remember to check the right number of things every day or however long I do it, right? So here's my question for you. If somebody's pushed on time, which is going to happen, right? That happens in every workplace. Not all the time, but sometimes. If they're pushed on time and they're going to come back to you at the end of a shift or something like that, and do you want them to say, hey, look, I did the check, but I didn't have time to get the checklist done? Or do you want them to come back and say, yeah, I did the checklist? And if you said, oh, that's really good, that was good, you go, yeah, I didn't get the check done, but I've done the checklist, right? So we're compliant. So which way do you want them to go? And this is a question that I ask senior leaders, board members, managers, supervisors. Doesn't matter who I ask. Do you want them to do the check or the checklist? Now, many of them, of course, say, I want both. And I'm like, well, you can't have both in this situation. But I don't think I'm telling fairy tales in that. I don't think it's that much of a stretch that this will happen to people. They will have to make this choice, right? So everybody says, okay, well, if it comes down to it, I want the check. And then they might have to explain why they didn't do the checklist. Okay, cool. Because that's the focus on safety. The issue now is, does it mean the same to everybody? So I come along with me on this question because it's got a few stages to it. And it sounds a bit weird, but it'll make sense at the end. what do you think, given this scenario, what do you think your frontline workers would think you think? So again, this is a question I ask senior leaders if I can. What do you think your frontline workers would think you think in this scenario? Do they think when they're pushed on time, it's more important to do the check and then maybe have to explain myself? Or do they think it's more important to do the checklist? Now, what that highlights, and I'm going to take a punt here and say for many of you watching this video, but certainly for my audiences, is it opens up the possibility that, yeah, they get it, that in fact there are people on the front line who would think, yeah, we've created a situation where they think the checklist is more important. So a couple of things in this point. We haven't done that on purpose, but we have done it, right? Because it goes against procedures, right? But it's been done, and you've done it, as in the organisation has done it, and the senior leaders are complicit in that, okay? And that's why I talk about this as being a cultural issue, and why this is an example of some questions that just highlight or spotlight the nature of how culture is a different beast than other things to try and tackle, right? That we've got this issue of, you've got this great safety management system over here that you put so much faith in to keep you compliant. You know that it's not the same as being safe, but worse than that is that when push comes to shove, people think that looking like you're being compliant is more important than actually being safe. And you didn't go out there and do that on purpose, but you did it, right? And that's the way that's the way the culture works. We did it through our language, our actions, our reinforcement, the way we do things and talk about things, particularly the way we investigate things and audit. Because when investigators and auditors come out, what do they ask about? They might ask what happened, but that's a very pointed question, but they often then drift back to, have you got the paperwork? When they say, have you done a risk assessment? What they actually mean is, do you have a risk assessment written out? Can you hear the difference in the language there? Not did you think about the risk, but have you got something you can show me? So we've accidentally created this situation, but it's a cultural issue, and it's something you have to address if you want to move forward in your cultural maturity journey. There's no way about it, and it's an insight into the nature of workplaces that have developed lots of systems. I think it's an inevitable thing that organisations go through and then they have to tackle. And by the way, you could replace safety with environment and quality and a bunch of other system processes over here. So this isn't just a safety issue, but safety is where it's highlighted. So I hope that made a bit of sense. If you've got any questions or comments, stick them down below. And yeah, thanks for watching.